not selective. That's open to the world.
We're using the Facebook.
Right.
You may proceed.
All right. Here
Are
we go.
recording?
Here we go. Here we go.
Hot mic.
I'm going to ask that everyone turn off their phones and ringers at this point.
No
This
flashing
is all about to
lights.
get serious. All right. And I'm just kidding. Are you recording already?
Mm-hmm.
Man, maybe we should start. All right, take two. I'm just kidding. All right, my name is Ray here. The topic of conversation today is the Red Hat Hyper-Converged infrastructure for virtualization. There's two technologies that's going to be used, and that's Gluster and Rev. The way that this all works is that you take your storage and your compute nodes and you tie them together, right? So in a traditional sense, most people will purchase servers and have compute instances, and then they also have storage instances, and then all of that gets tied in together on their network, right? So your compute, your storage, they all talk across the network. With the hyperconverged, the compute node actually has storage local to itself, right? So there is a little bit of network talk, but generally speaking, that's for just the replication and not to communicate out to the storage devices themselves. In this particular environment, I have two separate networks set up. I have my lab net and I have storage net. What we're looking at here is actually Cockpit, and this is running on the hypervisors themselves. So for each hypervisor, there's a Cockpit. I've linked all of the systems together so that I can see all three cockpit views from one dashboard. And that is this right here. So if I want to know disk I/O or performance for all three of my systems, I've got them linked, and I can watch the disk I/O, network I/O, memory, and CPU. The part that we're interested right now is the virtualization part for the Gluster. So Gluster is on the storage network. I kept the storage network separate from the overt communications, specifically so that I have disk traffic or storage traffic on one network interface, and I have overt or VM traffic on the other, right? I keep them separated.
Like that was pretty.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I would get a good, no response.
You want to sing?
You guys are great.
The laugh track in
All right.
We'll work on it.
So what we're looking at here is actually the devices themselves, or the hypervisors, and the storage device that's being presented out from them. So this is the device itself. If you can see up here, this is 192.168.130. That's my storage net, and each one of the Gluster nodes themselves. And this is the brick that's being presented out. What this gives you is a quick and dirty information about whether the cluster is up and running. So if I were to drop one of the nodes, you would see it go offline and a red X, and it wouldn't be happy, right? Gluster's main principle is data resiliency. So on these three devices, each block of data is replicated 3 times. So 1 per node, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but that's the way I set it up. As well as that, each one of the hypervisors can communicate with any one of the underlying Gluster nodes, right? So say I took hypervisor 2 offline, completely offline, they wouldn't necessarily have to communicate with either node 1 or node 2. They can pick, and they do so. There's an algorithm on the backside of Gluster that does that for them, right? The Gluster client. All right, so enough about Gluster. We'll go to the hosted engine. So with the So with the virtualization, you have hosted engine. My virtualization or my manager is running in the cluster, right? In some particular instances, you would run your manager outside of your environment, but because I only have 3 nodes, I run a self-hosted engine. And what that allows me to do is, this is my self-hosted engine here, and he runs internally on my 3 hosts, right? So I could put that hosted engine on any one of those nodes, and because it's backed by Gluster, he can run without a host if I so choose. And we can actually demo that here in a little bit. Back to the... So this cockpit gives you kind of your status of your cluster, right? Tells you that hosted engine is up, no big deal. And it'll do that as well if you're not, if you're not running it local. All right. So to see how this all works, so I was telling you that the 3 hosts replicate your data 3 times. So if you wanted to actually see that in action, you would come over to your dashboard and you could see your disk I/O. And what we'll do is I'll initiate an upload of a disk to the storage environment. And it's going to go to hosted storage. That's where I'm running, that's where the Gluster cluster is under the hosted storage. And then click upload or OK. And then here in a second, he'll start to upload this disk. It's not quite as fast here. It'll take a couple minutes. So as soon as it starts transferring, we'll go back. All right, so anytime that you see, you'll see the disk I/O start to take off, and it's the Gluster on the back end. See how these 3 are all tied together? That's Gluster on the back end replicating itself by 3, right? So it writes it out to each host. So there is a little bit of network overhead whenever it's doing its writes and stuff like that, but it's not really that bad. And then this will go on. Normally it would just go up and stay up as far as the disk transfer, but because I'm transferring this over a VPN to my cluster at the house, it does it in spikes. But that's the Gluster itself working. So all 3 hosts writing all at the same time to their disks, and everything goes on about its business. Now, if you were to have where the network is not set up correctly, and I did this a couple times, or the disks aren't functioning correctly, so I tried it with LVM or SSD caching to a slower set of spinning disks on the back. So right now there's a 1 terabyte solid state drive in there that I'm writing to as far as the Gluster is concerned. In the beginning, I had it writing to LVM cache so that it wrote all the way down to the spinning disk, and then eventually, based off of the algorithm, it would move that data back up to the SSD cache. I did not have good luck with that, and I had several instances where it pretty much crashed and bombed out on me. In that particular case, you would see these VMs would go to pause state, waiting for the disk locks to open back up, and then eventually it would just crash altogether. Rev Manager would, because it was trying to run on the same disks that it was having issues with. So there was several iterations there. But this particular scenario where I'm writing everything straight out to the SSD drive, it works much better. No LVM cache, no nothing, just straight out to the disks. There are instances where I do get 1 gigabit per second throughput across the cluster. So it's a pretty speedy transfer of data out to all 3 nodes. And it'll sustain that for a short period, and then it'll go back down to a slower write speed. But so far I've been pretty happy with this setup. All right, so into the Rev Manager. So now that we've talked about the cluster piece, we'll talk about the Rev and Rev Manager. Like I said, each one of the hosts communicates directly to their own or to one of the other nodes' mount points. And what that does is it allows me to take my hosted engine, and it will allow me to move them around, and without any kind of downtime or anything like that, I can migrate them. You watch, it's not going to work.
You set it up like you did here, it's not gonna work.
You're right, there is a problem with the stuff here.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
All right, so what's happening on the back end is right there, it's showing you that my virtual machine is migrating off of the first hypervisor, and it's migrating to the third hypervisor.
Can you tell us a little bit about your migration network? Did you tune in any at all?
Just on the over.
On over, no
Mhm.
separate storage network?
Yeah, there's 2 separate networks. I have storage on one side.
For your migration network?
No, the migration happens on StoreNet. So the network itself for this one is LabStoneNet, and that's where the Gluster and also my iSCSI come out of. And then on the front side, my overt network, that's where all my VM traffic happens.
Can you click on compute?
Yeah.
And clusters and default, I guess. And logical network. So your migration network is actually still happening on your overt management network there.
What?
If you look at managed networks,
I only have 2 networks.
right,
It's not.
LabStoneNet and overt management net.
Yeah.
But the migration.
Oh, you're talking about the memory?
I'm talking
when it's
about
copying the memory over?
The migration traffic, yeah.
Right.
It's going over your overt management network.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was asking about.
Yes. That was intentional, because I didn't want to disrupt the Gluster or my iSCSI domain.
And you didn't create another network for that.
No.
So display, migration, management, and VMs are all over overt management.
Yes. Yep. Because the way that Gluster does it, it communicates with all 3 all simultaneously. I didn't want the.
Right. Well, I was just asking how your networks were set up.
Yeah. So basically, it's kind of vanilla, with the exception of I broke out the storage piece, and that's represented in the whenever you look at the Gluster piece. So that's the 130 network is my storage.
But that's the storage traffic only, none of the Rev
Right.
specific stuff.
Right.
Because I've seen your graphs before, I wanted to know what that encompassed.
Yeah. Well, the cockpit itself doesn't break out the individual interfaces, but if I was to terminate this this copy, you will see it will go back to a very erratic. And that's because it's doing the iSCSI domain from the storage. So that canceled.
Now, when you did your iSCSI, are you using file as your backstore or block when you set up your iSCSI target?
I don't know. On there, it gave me the option to present a block of storage, and that's what I took.
Okay, so you're using its setup to do it, not your own. You didn't have to use Target CLI to create a block of storage.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, I did the discovery.
Okay. Sorry,
Oh, it's all right.
I was just curious.
So this is my storage.
Oh, you're using the Synology.
I'm using both. I have two separate storage domains. One for my Gluster devices. I guess I should explain that. There's two pieces of the storage. I have the hosted engine storage and my VM storage. Um, what's transpiring there is the VM storage domain. With the two separate pieces, I can have slower disk space going to my NAS. And I can have fast disk access on my Gluster. So this is my target. So basically, I just capped out 2 terabytes, presented it. I did a discovery on the Rev Manager, and then did the login.
And you're doing it as iSCSI lines.
Yeah. You can actually see those in the.
Did you figure out how to turn off the warning that Synology keeps telling you that it's all the way full because you're actually using all the disk space?
So whenever I did I think it was 200 gig was what the recommended hosted engine storage space was. Um, I was having that error, but because I went to the hosted engine where it has a terabyte of space, it doesn't care. So now that I'm not running it and I'm only running just the one storage domain instead of the two, where I had the self-hosted engine on his own storage domain and then my VM store, I don't have that anymore. I took that away.
That's what we talked about, wasn't
Yeah. These are actually the physical disks and the way that they write. I love Cockpit. Cockpit is pretty awesome. It gives you a very clean view into what's happening on the system, and it can be very useful if you wanted to go in here and create volume groups or whatnot. The piece I am not using is the VDO. That's the data deduplication pieces. I was not sure about that whenever I first set it up, so I didn't enable it, didn't do anything with it because I wasn't terribly knowledgeable about it. But the cockpit itself is a really clean view of what's happening on your system, how everything's set up. You can actually go in here and add bonding, add VLANs, so on and so forth. It gives you some logging.
Super useful tool.
I highly recommend it if you have not looked at it to look at it. It is customizable, so there's a different cockpit for Gluster than there is for OpenShift, right? So you can go in there, and if there's something that you want from the OpenShift pieces or whatever, you can pull those in over, and there are several knowledge-based articles out there that will assist you in doing that. I've not done it yet, so use it at your own risk. So where was I? Let's see. Oh, back to the compute and the virtual machines. So he's finally finished transferring, right? So remember he was on Rev, my first hypervisor in the beginning, and now he resides on number 3. So generally speaking, you don't really see any network traffic whenever you're migrating from one host to another, like the hosted engine, because it is talking to all 3 disks. They know exactly what position he's in, where he needs to be. And the only thing that you're seeing the network traffic on is the memory pieces, right? So as he's copying over the memory that's in the system, and then he goes back and he says, hey, where does this disk live? It's there, start him up, or continue running. Either way. And that's pretty much, that is hyper-converged in a nutshell. Some of the use cases that that I was reading about were whenever the customer wants something out more towards the end users, they will put these what's considered Rev in a box or hyper-converged out at their local site so that they have compute power and they can run their VMs right there, right? So what they were talking about was the return on investment. So they're not actually going out and purchasing big racks of servers, and they got a data center team that's got to rack and stack them. They'll purchase a whole box that's designed to do this. And from my understanding, there's several different companies out there that will actually provide a whole box that, you know, people have gone in and guaranteed that this stuff will work together with this, you know, with this particular piece of software, right? You just throw up your Rev in a box. Now your application developers have something to work on, right? They can run their Ansible scripts or their OpenShift or whatever they want to do, and it's local to them, right? For my particular case, that is kind of the reason that I decided to go with this. This is my whole setup right here. This is everything that you're seeing is this, right? So down here is the SAN, what we were talking about, or the NAS, the network attached storage, and that's the VM storage domain. That's my slower storage domain. It's got a tremendous amount more storage. I think there's 8 terabytes in there of usable space. In these, the NUCs, there's 3 compute nodes, and that goes back to the devices in here under hosts. That is those 3 devices.
And those 3 compute nodes are also your 3 cluster nodes.
And those 3 compute nodes are my cluster nodes. So inside of each one of those nodes are 2 1 terabyte drives. One is for the operating system slash other storage that I haven't presented yet, and the other terabyte drive is Gluster.
That's what's nice about this setup. You take older equipment, throw a bunch of hard drives in it, and you don't need a NAS or other storage.
Yeah.
It's just right there.
So this is a simple 8-port switch or a managed 8-port switch, and the 3 nodes themselves. And that's all the bigger that my environment is, right? No big rack servers. My wife isn't, you know, getting on to me because I'm heating up the whole house or running the power bill up, right? It's just that. Or taking up a lot of space or making her space ugly because I have this big gigantic rack that I'm, you know, doing stuff with. So that in a nutshell is the hyperconverged infrastructure for virtualization. It's super slick. It's not very difficult to set up and get running. Literally, there is a GUI that you can go through and click and tell it exactly what it is that you want. If I had an unconfigured node, I would show you that.
Are upgrades non-intrusive?
Huh?
Are upgrades non-intrusive?
Upgrades are a little bit intrusive. So the hosts themselves, you don't necessarily need to do a whole lot to it. You can take one offline.
It's like you have 2, then you got 3 right now.
Yeah, they won't install. I've tried it. So basically, if it's just a host, you're okay to just go ahead and do your upgrade, right? If it's the manager, you have to put the manager into a global maintenance mode, and then if the upgrade is one of the minor version releases and nothing really needs to be done other than software packages need to be updated, everything is okay. You do your engine setup upgrade or whatever it is, and it'll go through and it'll copy in your packages and then do your upgrade process. I've had issues with that, doing that upgrade process a little bit. And no, I think it's because I didn't follow the instructions correctly, right? So there is definitely a process that you have to follow. Otherwise, things will get out of whack, and the self-hosted engine doesn't want to come back online, or stuff like that.
But there are additional steps you have to take
Yeah.
if you're self-hosted, which causes
Yeah.
additional pain points. And another thing you
And
probably haven't hit yet
and
that you've got to worry about is your Synology in there too. As it
you
gets
have to
updates,
drop the whole
it
environment.
has to reboot.
What
Yeah.
about heart beating and DRS or the equivalent of that?
Gluster handles that all for you.
Does it? Okay.
Yep. And then there's also communication between Rev Manager and the host themselves, but that's handled at the over with the over pieces.
Does the cluster running underneath add any complexity before you can just reboot that host after an upgrade, or is it pretty easy to just run the upgrade, reboot the host, and it'll handle all of that, everything it needs to do to alert the cluster and go down and come back up and rejoin the cluster?
Yes. The way I have it set up now, it does. But before, whenever I was telling you about writing out to the SSD cache and the slow disk writes out to those 2 terabyte spinning drives, it had a lot of problems with that, and they didn't want to come back up. Gluster would take an extremely long time to join back to the cluster, and then by that time, Rev Manager was extremely angry, and things started to fall apart on me.
Like his wife.
Yeah. Are you able to customize, create, and save profiles for each host? Like a host profile that includes things like round robin preference, or it's there's a couple other preferences like Active Directory, I believe is some setting you can do. And I'm referring to VMware, just from my experience, but just being able to customize a profile for a specific host. Is there and save that host profile associated with that host if it should go down, and does it
Oh, you're talking about the what is that?
I'm not sure what the terminology is here.
Hang on, I get there in just a second. So if I wanted the VM to come back up on a specific host, there is a specific word for that, and I don't remember what it is.
Your affinity settings.
Affinity settings.
You're
Yeah.
talking about.
Affinity
Not
labels.
quite sure that you're talking about the affinity labels. So when you're talking about host
So-
profile and VMware.
I think I'm thinking more of maybe stateless VMs. If you guys do have like a stateless environment, do you have a place to store those?
Like a template?
So the
Yeah.
stateless
Okay.
machines would go back to the template.
All right.
Ray's just got real
This is
VMs
just
there
real
that's
stateful.
Okay.
stateful.
Yeah. So what you were talking about, so if I wanted to set an affinity rule, right, where there was a specific host that I wanted a VM to come up on, say I gave my son a gaming computer or a gaming virtual machine, and I always wanted him to do it on a specific host, or if I had one of those a big server that he can come up and play on, I would set an affinity rule for a specific host, right? So say he needs,
Hard coding it to that host.
yeah, so every time that machine comes online, he gets that host. What you're talking about is the templates. And yes, I did build templates, just a base template, so that whenever I run my Ansible script, basically I get a virtual machine with a 40 gig drive right out of the box. 8 gigs of memory, 40 gig drive, and then every system that I make from that gets the same thing. It gets hooked to overt management, so on and so forth.
And then you've got cloud in it that can customize that VM
Yeah.
further. So if he has that Rel 7 template that's, vanilla, and you had a web server or whatever die, you might have your cloud init script there. You create a new VM based on the template, give it that cloud init script, pops the VM up, downloads Apache or Tomcat or whatever you've got it set to do, reconfigures itself and everything else.
What's that?
Over.
Oh,
It's an
Yeah.
upstream name
Yeah.
for Rev.
The,
They're the same thing.
the stateful and stateless you were asking about, that would be done in the compute under virtual machine pools.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there, if you turn off the virtual machine, it'll return to the base image that the pool was built on.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm not doing that. Eventually, I'd like to get to the point to where I'm doing everything out of satellite server. So all the provisioning, all the setup, the whole 9 yards, attaching to IDM, attaching to this and that. I'd like to do all that out of satellite server. Huh? What's that?
Can you,
I said I know a guy that knows how to set that up.
Yeah.
can you click on compute and list your VMs again?
Uh-huh.
So you've
Satellite
got your
in there?
satellite living in that environment.
Yes, I do.
Show us all your VMs.
That's all of them right
Show
there.
us what you got, big boy.
Show us.
So like I said, this is a lab environment, and there's a lot of this that's very volatile,
Yeah.
and I break it a lot.
The other problem you're gonna have here too, possibly, is if like the admin account or something would be disabled and stuff, since IBM is in your Rev
Well,
environment, because
I
if
did-
you can only authenticate based on IDM, and IDM isn't set to be turned on.
no, I actually left admin alone. Admin's still there. So
Well,
admin
you
and
can
then,
disable that too, so that would be
yeah.
like a security thing.
I don't know about that.
Too, with having my full environment on my hyper-converged cluster was DNS not being there whenever I bring in the environment.
Yes.
So I ran into that problem as well, and my resolution for that was to add all the Rev Manager and my hosts to Etsy host.
That's what I did as well. But,
Right.
I've also since then put a DNS server outside, so that way I'm not going to worry about it. It's also my IDM ship bit, but never mind that.
So in this evolution, I've run into quite a few different scenarios where I've made my own self a blocker. In IDM, this is my IDM server. These are my users.
Privileged?
Huh?
I'm not privileged enough to be there.
No, you're not.
No. That was a very quick response.
I mean, I'm only gone for a month or two.
So I go through, and as I bring a new host on, and this is the part about as I'm going through the environment, there are a lot of things and a lot of steps up to this point. There are a lot more steps and things that I want to do in this environment. But as I bring the host on and I enroll them into the IDM server, I have it set up this, and I have it doing the DNS for me, so that as I add them, they come right in. And there's my DNS. Those are my DNS entries for each one of my hosts.
Why is Rev Manager not enrolled?
Huh?
Rev Manager was not enrolled as us.
He's Rev Manager here.
No, he's in DNS, but go back to the screen where it showed the whole list.
Oh,
It showed what was
so
enrolled.
whenever I enroll Rev Manager as a client, I am getting a error that it tells me that I need to connect or configure SSSD independently. Rev Manager is actually connected to IDM through the UI,
For the GUI, but
but for the underlying system, no. Every time I do that, I get an error,
Interesting.
and I have not
Did
stopped.
you open a Bugzilla?
No.
On 4.1, and I didn't have a problem.
I'm on 4.2 and I didn't have a problem either.
I don't know.
Okay, great.
I don't know. I'm just telling you that that's what happens every time I try to enroll them as a client.
Stock is support.
Yeah, no,
Did you reinstall Rev Manager?
several times.
Oh wait, you're using the self-hosted.
This is my satellite server. And again, as I bring hosts on, I enroll them into satellite. Where'd it go? All hosts. I enroll them into satellite and get the software packages. So instead of going out to the internet and doing the package management from the content delivery network or the Red Hat channels, I do it all from my satellite server internal, right? This is a work in progress. I haven't gotten terribly far off into it. Openstack was a recent addition as of last night. So I'm running a single node OpenStack PackStack environment. And I have not done anything with him, so there's nothing to demo in here. I haven't even created a new virtual machine in here. Eventually, what I'd like to do is to tie them all together so that I have compute resources coming out of OpenStack. I also have an OpenShift cluster in here. And I'd like to tie them all together. So I have OpenStack, Rev, and OpenShift. And then eventually I'd like to have a small CloudForms set up so that I can communicate with all my different providers and then do demos with that.
Would you look at me for about one?
So, you've got your environment set up with Rev to allow the nested virtualization. He's thinking.
What's that?
You can't talk to him when he's thinking and typing.
This
He
is
can do two things
impossible.
at once, but not three.
This is impossible. So this is my OpenShift environment. I have hooked him into LDAP, by the way. I don't have the application persistent volume stuff set up on Gluster yet. So if I was to do a persistent volume clean to start up one, it would just sit there and spin and spin and spin, and then it would eventually fail.
Where you at on that?
Eventually I'll get there. I'm close. I'm close. So that's pretty much the environment. And this is my storage domain. These are my USCSI targets and LUNs. And this is the 2 terabyte section that I provisioned out for my data store. That's this guy right here, the hosted storage. Or I'm sorry, the VM store. VM store DOM 1 is this guy right here. And he's tied back through the iSCSI target and LUNs. But that's not really part of the hyper-converged piece because it is off storage or off device storage. Are there any other questions?
What did you have in your lab?
About $3,500. I paid a premium for size.
Nobody.
But the thing is, he likes it small.
Right. Pun intended or not, I don't know.
Hey, Ray, that question I had earlier about your Rev environment. So
Yes.
you're doing Openstack, obviously, on top of Rev, using nested virtualization.
Right.
Can you describe what you did to get the nested virtualization to work?
Oh, I haven't tried the nested virtualization yet. I just did a VM install.
Oh, so you haven't actually put out an
No.
Openstack instance yet?
No.
Oh, okay. Never mind then yet.
Why, are you saying that it'll break it?
Well, I'm saying that there are a few things you need to do to your cluster and hypervisors to pass the necessary kernel parameters to allow multiple levels of nested virtualization. So basically, right now what you've got is like an AWS if you want to throw OpenStack or Rev on it. It wouldn't do the nested virtualization. Go to Rev.
If I wanted to put...
If you wanted to create an instance right now from an image,
Yeah.
performance would be sucky.
Well, probably.
But if you did some stuff in Rev to your hypervisors to allow the nested virtualization, it would pass that hardware all the way up to that nested VM, if you will. Well, we did that on our laptops too. You can configure a kernel module parameter so you can nest VMs in KVM. You've also got to do that in Rev.
I don't think I need to do anything else.
But while you're waiting on that instance to launch, can you go back to your Rev Manager
Boop.
and compute, I believe, clusters, I think, edit.
No, I haven't done any optimization for the nested virtualization.
So you've got Skylake, good there. probably want to, on your cluster, enable the memory ballooning too, optimization.
So I am not actually allowing the ballooning. So I go into the VMs and specify both their running and the maximum so
Okay.
that it locks it in. I don't have enough memory, so that's another thing
Oh,
about
that's
this
right, you
environment.
went with small with vanilla.
Right, so that's another thing about this environment. So if you notice, I'm running right at 50% memory consumption right now. Some of my virtual machines could be optimized a little bit. They don't necessarily run at about 75%. Some of the VMs run a little bit over. But the way that I was just telling Travis is that I lock them down to a specific size. Oh, I should have just stayed there. Is I give them a max memory of the memory that I want them to consume. So the memory size and the max memory, and that keeps them locked into that specific memory. It doesn't allow memory ballooning or anything like that. So no dynamic, and that's because I'm running.
What do you have resource allocation at? What are you saying it's guaranteed memory estimate? So 49 to 6 for all.
Yeah.
And go ahead and click on one of your hosts now and edit. Because that's the other piece where you set up the hosts for nested virtualization. So edit on a host.
I'm going to move him back real quick.
Okay.
And I'm just going to push my VM back to my hypervisor 1 to kind of even out the load.
Go ahead and hit edit though while you're there. So go down to kernel. So if you want the nested virtualization,
Yeah, turn this guy.
you gotta check that, and that will do the same thing as the KVM module pass-through when you configure the kernel.
Yeah.
That will fix some performance if you're actually really going to run your Openstack stuff.
Just for little instances. I don't plan on putting anything major in the OpenStack environment.
Well, yeah, but even the little instance it will never boot. Or if it does, it will take hours. Because I did that and it was horrible.
So what do you plan on using all this infrastructure for? Are you going to do some big time development?
He's going to write documentation.
Stuff.
Big time development.
Stuff.
This is just a playground. Just a playground.
He's going to educate my buddy Randy.
Good luck.
Where did you tell it to see instances?
See if you can bring up the console. It's going to sit there a long time.
Yeah. But
Turn it on, man.
that's kind of it.
Check the button.
He can't because he's got to reboot this stuff. That's got to.
I had to,
You
yeah.
got high availability.
What?
We didn't have enough memory for that.
Yeah.
Oh, there's plenty of memory.
Shut some stuff down.
He needs all 3 hypervisors up to run this environment. That's also
No.
why you can run with only 2.
Yeah. It'll just shift everything over to
He's
the.
only using 50% right now, so 2 should be okay.
Yeah.
Come on, do it.
Nothing wrong with it. Just can't get much over 50%. Error or
Error.
But I don't think that should happen.
Error.
that's the one you got Rev M on.
No, he's running on 1.
You migrated him to 3.
I
No,
did earlier.
He migrated him back off.
Alright.
I missed that too.
He said I'm
What?
going to
They
move
definitely won't let that happen.
Ray said I'm going to move him back, and he showed him moving it back.
So you stayed at home moving VMs around all night? Is that?
No, no, I don't. I try not to get them to move at all.
What'd you say, Justin?
Or if you sit at home and move VMs around all night as a hobby, or?
No. I'd say just setting them up and tinkering with them.
My problem is set it up, and then I don't maintain it because I don't actually make anything running clear. So then when I want to go test something, then I'm like, shit, all this stuff's way out of date. And I gotta spend a week upgrading everything, hoping I don't have issues.
You forget you had the stuff there.
Yeah.
I did the same thing, cause
You got
I
GitLab running
I couldn't
I do.
figure out why
as a VM or as a
my
As-
stuff
technology?
wouldn't work.
As a VM.
I lost
Yep,
my
he's right
IBM
there.
server when I rebooted the host that it was on. I didn't have it set to start out.
I have Ansible Tower, I've got GitLab, the hosted engine, IDM, the 3-node OpenShift cluster, one compute, or one infrastructure, one master, and then 2 compute or 2 apps,
3 or 4 months.
the Openstack, and then the SAT server.
My certs had expired for IDM. No bueno. Thus far, I have not been able to get those fixed, and I just kind of gave up on it.
Something else. Okay.
I sent you an email, by the way. I
Okay.
sent it to these guys, but some of my reps leave them.
Okay. Cool. I did see, these, I guess we're done with the breakdown.
Yeah, we're done.
I noticed a checkbox in, when I go in and edit a VM, there's a
The
checkbox.